It all started a long time ago. I was 6 years old and in first grade when I realized that I wanted to be a Salvation Army officer. Well, I didn't exactly know that I was going to be an officer. I just knew that I loved Jesus, I loved the Salvation Army, and I wanted to be there all the time. I was 6 years old and the teacher asked us, "What's your favorite day of the week?" Well, I couldn't imagine that anybody would say anything other than Sunday, because I loved to be at the Army on Sunday mornings, Sunday evenings, certainly during the week. I loved being at the Army. That was the beginning of what I believe was my calling to be a Salvation Army officer. I wasn't even saved yet. That happened 4 years later when I was 10 years old, and the Corps officers were away on holiday, and I realized that there weren't going to be very many people at the Corps that night, but our family was there. So I went to the Corps, and they didn't have a speaker, but they left a movie for us to watch about the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. It was narrated by Johnny Cash, and it told an amazing story. I could not wait to get my 10-year-old self to the altar, to ask Jesus into my heart. I kept thinking, if he could die on the cross for me, certainly I could give my life for him. I didn't know exactly what that meant, but I was beginning to learn. I was a junior soldier. I grew up going to all the youth programs, learned how to play a cornet, because that's what you do in the Army. And then when I was 14 and went to music camp, I was introduced to the next place in my calling, my experience of knowing Jesus more. Somebody introduced me to the idea of holiness, of living a sanctified life, of giving my whole life over to Jesus, that he would have control over all of it. Again, at 14, I don't know that I fully understood that then. But again, it was another moment where God planted in me a desire to know more about him so that I could serve him better one day. I was very blessed to grow up in a Corps where the adults allowed us young kids, young people, teenagers, to take part in the Corps programs. And so I was the timbrel leader, and I got to help with a Sunday school class. Little by little, I was given more and more responsibility, until one day I was asked to speak on a Sunday night. I was so nervous about that. But I spoke, probably it was about 5 minutes long, but I realized then that I loved the study of God's Word, and I was ready to learn more about that. Well, it was time to graduate from high school and go off to college, where I went at age 18, sure that one day, regardless of what I studied, I would be a Salvation Army officer. But then I met Steve Morris. He was just exactly what I was looking for. Well, I don't know if I was looking for him, but I found him. He was a Salvationist, grew up in a Salvation Army family. His parents were officers. He was involved in the Salvation Army Fellowship. That's how we met. But it wasn't long after our meeting that I realized he was not called to be a Salvation Army officer. And thus the challenge began. I was sure that God placed him in my life. He seemed just perfect for me. But I also knew that if he wasn't called, I certainly had to follow my calling. Well, that was a struggle and a challenge, and I can't tell you that we did it very well during those years of university. But after graduation, when we went our separate ways, I was still holding on to the idea that one day we would reestablish our relationship. I was now 22 years old, and I was sitting in a Salvation Army meeting where there was going to be a call to officership. And I sat with my friends. In fact, I was watching their purses and their coats and jackets, because most of them were going to go up for the call to officership. And we knew that. They were going to training. So I told them I would watch their things while they were gone. They got up there. There I sat in the row, when one of the young people from my Corps came and found me and said, "Aren't you supposed to be up there?" And I said these words, "Oh, I can't go up there. I'm dating Steve Morris. And the young person said to me, "I don't think this has anything to do with Steve Morris." Those words, they were exactly what I probably needed to hear, but didn't really want to at that moment. But it was in that moment that I realized my calling was my calling. And regardless of what Steve Morris was ever going to do, it was up to me to make the decision to follow through on what God had called me to years before, and to stand up and walk down that long aisle and go forward and say, "Yes, Lord, I'll do this. I'll do this for you, because this is what you want me to do." I knew that after that weekend, a very difficult phone call was going to be required, because Steve was living a long way from where I was living at that time. So I picked up the phone and made the call, and he very quickly said, "I have something I need to tell you." Now, I need to tell you, we hadn't talked about officership in a very long time. And so this was going to be probably the last call I thought we would have together. Until Steve says, "I don't know where you are regarding officership, but I've had an experience in the last couple of months where I know without question that God has called me to be a Salvation Army officer. I just don't know where you are with that." Well, you could have knocked me over at that point, because I couldn't believe I was calling to say, I'm going to training in New York, and he was asking where we would go to training together. In those few moments that we both came to the conclusion, separately, but reasonably at the same time, I realized that God had called me, but wanted me to be called on my own. That Steve couldn't go to training because I was called, and I couldn't follow him into something that I was not called to. And so we made the decision. Yes, we got married, and we ended up going to training in Atlanta, Georgia, where we became officers and have served on a great adventure together ever since. I am so grateful that God gave me this calling years ago. I'm so grateful that he gave me time to work it out over the years. And I'm so grateful for the opportunity to serve in an amazing adventure that he calls officership. Now, I just need to get that adventure moving again and get myself to Japan. And when I do, I will look forward to sharing in what God's asking you to do, even today. God bless you today.